All right. I'm very glad to be here talking about this, partly because it is a nice way of pushing back on my natural disposition. I have to say that when I think about what's going on in our universities and our schools, it doesn't always come to mind as a source of American strength. But I was hoping we could talk a little bit about some of the bright spots in American education, how we might be able to build on it, and we've got a great duo here to talk about it. I'm going to start with Ian Rowe, who is a colleague of mine at the American Enterprise Institute, and also has a formidable number of jobs. He's the co-founder of Vertex Partnership Academies, the chairman of the board of Spence Chapin, a nonprofit adoption services organization, the co-founder of the National Summer School Initiative, a senior fellow at the Woodson Center, and a writer for the 1776 Unites campaign. And until 2020, he was the CEO of Public Prep, a nonprofit network of public charter schools based in the South Bronx and Lower East Side of Manhattan. And he has worked everywhere from the Gates Foundation to MTV to Teach for America. Ian, tell me what is going on that gives you hope for American education.
Well, first of all, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I have so many jobs. I don't have time to be depressed. I can only be hopeful and optimistic. Well, what gives me hope? Well, first of all, I run schools. That is an inherently optimistic enterprise because I'm trying to instill in the young people that go to our schools this idea that they can do hard things, that there might be all sorts of forces, perceived or actual, that everyone else is telling you that you cannot do, but we're the place that young people are understanding what they can do. And I am myself, I'm a product of the New York City K-12 public education system. I went to Brooklyn Tech, if there are any tech engineers in the room. But I had a phenomenal public school education. And so I know what's possible, not just within the education context. There's also criticality of family and faith in these other institutions, but I know what is possible with schooling. And among my litany of things you just mentioned, we just opened a virtues-based international baccalaureate high school in the Bronx. In a district in which only 7% of ninth graders that start ninth grade 4 years later graduate from high school ready for college. I mean, it's just you start ninth grade and you either drop out or you actually do earn your diploma, but still can't do math nor reading without remediation. And so we've started a school. So that I'm very excited and very optimistic about that. But just to give you a sense of some of the things I'm not so optimistic about, we were sued by the teachers union to shut us down even before we opened, just to give you a sense of the obstacles. But it gives me hope because we beat the teachers union. So
not getting sued by the teachers union would have been a bad sign, I think.
You know what's interesting about that? Sometimes you actually have to win the big challenges. And that, of course, you must think, oh, why is this happening? But our victory is a huge precedent that's not only allows new high schools to open in the Bronx, but the structure that we proposed and was approved by a New York State Supreme Court judge can now be replicated all across the country. So sometimes you got to fight and win.
That's great. So it seems to me that one of the possible bright spots, and I'll be interested to hear if you agree, is that we have just in the last couple of years begun to see a little bit of a pushback against what had previously been a strong bipartisan consensus that suffused our entire culture, that our goal should be to get everybody to go to college, and that really the purpose of high school is to prepare people, not for a responsible adulthood, which can take a variety of forms, but for college. And I wonder if you see some of these things that are happening now, and we've got Maryland and Pennsylvania opening up state jobs, for example, and saying you don't actually have to have a college degree for all of these jobs.
Yep.
So do you see this as something that's taking root, and does it affect how you think about K-12 education in the schools that you start?
Yeah, I think that this is the next frontier in K-12 and specifically secondary education in high school. I mean, certainly when I started running public charter schools, elementary and middle schools in 2010, if you looked at our mission statements, everything was designed to be on a predictive path, to a 4-year degree at a university or college. That was it. And now I've launched a high school. And so I was a college guy. But the college for all approach, or college for all solely, has not served our country well. It's still the case that something like 30, maybe 30, 40% of all Americans even have a college degree. And there's also this kind of second-class citizenship status often placed on people who don't pursue a college degree. And I think that does need to change, and there's lots of data. So one of my big things is not just having ideas, but putting ideas into action. So the Vertex Partnership Academies, the high school that we've just launched in the Bronx, at the end of your sophomore year, each student will have the opportunity to choose either the International Baccalaureate Diploma pathway or the International Baccalaureate Careers pathway. If they choose the Careers pathway, that gives the opportunity to do apprenticeships. Like Mayo Clinic, we're in discussions to be a partner, where during your junior and senior year, maybe one day a week, you're going to work at a New York City hospital in phlebotomy. And over the course of that 2 years, you'll actually become credentialed as a phlebotomist. And so if you choose at the end of your senior year to go work directly into industry, that's wonderful. There's no shame in the game. And so we're looking at partnerships with Google, Amazon, in real estate. And so I think this is an incredible opportunity to bring employers into the K-12 space in a way that they can diversify and strengthen their talent pipeline for particular industries. And there's also tons of research, particularly for young boys, low-income boys, that when they do pursue apprenticeships and work right out of high school, that doesn't mean that they've given up on college as a potential experience still, but there are much lower rates of non-marital births, higher rates of marriage, higher rates of civic activity. So there's a lot of data that suggests that creating multiple pathways in high school, I think, will serve our high school population much better than the college for all approach has.
I want to stick with that idea of increasing options and creating new pathways, but I'm going to turn next to Pano Kanelos, who is the author of books and articles and essays about Shakespeare, and was the head of St. John's College in Annapolis, but maybe most important for this discussion is the founding president of the University of Austin. Tell us a little bit about this venture.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here today. And I'm just going to quickly footnote things that make me hopeful are people like Ian doing what he's doing to improve the educational system, K through 12. And we have the responsibility, those of us in higher education, to carry that torch forward. So the project I'm involved with, University of Austin, began really less than 2 years ago. We had a group of people who were increasingly concerned about a series of interlocking crises in higher education. On the one hand, it seemed that the kind of foundational principles that would uphold a true education, a true liberal education, principles of open inquiry and civil discourse were increasingly compromised at institutions and under threat. The financial model of higher education is collapsing day after day. The curricular model of higher education hasn't changed in almost 130 years since the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. That's where we kind of locked into the dominant model we have in four-year colleges today, and we haven't really changed, even though the world's changed quite a bit. So a group of us have been sort of noodling over these problems and thinking about whether the best approach to renew higher education should be through existing institutions, and I was a college president at the time, or through the creation of new institutions. And we decided that a new institution could challenge existing institutions and also open up new pathways. So in November 2021, we boldly announced to the world that we were opening the University of Austin, dedicated to the fearless pursuit of truth. Just saying that broke the internet. All right. We were the #1 story on Twitter in the world for 24 hours straight.
Which usually you don't want to be.
You don't want to be the #1 story on Twitter. But what it did was it immediately increased the visibility of our institution as one trying to answer these questions, trying to think about the financial model of higher education, trying to think about questions: how many students should go to college? If they do, what do you do with them when they get there? How do we ensure that the fundamental principles that have always grounded higher education are preserved over time? And how do we think about the future in which the world is changing so rapidly that the very enterprise we're involved with, the cultivation of knowledge, is being challenged? I mean, 2 weeks ago, I didn't know what ChatGPT was. And now practically every conversation I have, people ask me, what are you going to do about this ChatGPT? And that's something we have to think very serious about when it comes to the realm of higher education. So we believe that if the problem of our moment, the problem of our culture, is a pervasive nihilism, which I believe it is, the response to this is to build, to create, to found institutions. The creative impulse of human beings is what has always allowed us to overcome challenges, even if those challenges are ones we've created ourselves. So founding a new university is intended to model ways forward for higher education, but for education in general.
And how's it going?
Oh, it's going great. I mean, miraculously great. When we first started this project, I was told by all the experts it was going to take at least 10 years to start a university. And I said, we're going to do it in 3. We're going to bring our first class of freshmen in 3 years. And that's fall of 2024. We are on target to do that. So we have...
And weren't you overwhelmed with applications from faculty?
Yeah. So thank you, Ian. So the first week or two after making our announcement, we received over 5,000 resumes from faculty at other institutions asking to join us. So that's a data point I think that's is indicative of how disaffected many faculty are out there in higher education. So yeah, it's going great. We've been raising the money we need to raise. We are preparing to welcome students. We have an amazing curriculum we've built out. And so it's a joy. The project is a joy.
But there are some regulatory barriers, are there? I mean, particularly with respect to the accreditation.
Yes. So accreditation is, it's a challenge for all new institutions. It has a kind of, the timeline of accreditation. Sorry, can you hear me okay? Good, okay. The timeline of accreditation is one of the challenges for new institutions. It takes about 7 years to become fully accredited. So, when you're starting a new school and you're trying to attract that first class of students, you're actually not allowed to be a fully accredited institution. Thank you. Is that on? Hello? Is that on? Okay, good, thank you. Now I'm going to do karaoke. So you're actually not allowed to be in an accredited institution until you graduate your first class of students. Just think about that obstacle, right? You have to attract students, your first class, and they know that they're going to graduate from a not yet accredited institution. So that's one of the barriers that really challenges the formation of new universities. And I think the thing we need more than anything else...
It's almost as though the system was designed as a cartel.
That's your word, not mine, accreditors. I didn't say it, he did.
Yeah.
Look, there's significant barriers, and the system needs competition. We need new institutions. That's the only way we're going to get better.
Yep.
So there are all sorts of challenges in starting these new institutions, and a system that is in many ways stacked against new institutions being started. But I'm sure you've also given some thought to the question of how to escape the gravitational pull of the rest of the system. How do you keep these new institutions from drifting and losing sight of their mission?
Well, that's the question I get asked most frequently. If one of the problems we've had in higher education is a kind of, let's call it mission drift, schools that, whose motto is Veritas, I won't name names, no longer uphold uphold not only the principle of truth, but the possibility of truth. How do we as a university stick to our mission over time? And I think one of the things about this current moment in the crisis is there are a lot of lessons that are very observable. What most institutions are lacking, I would say, are two important things: a governance structure that is mission-centered, and then the ability to constantly and consistently self-assess whether you're adhering to your mission. So on the governance structure, one of our founding trustees is the historian Neil Ferguson. And Neil is one of the primary drafters of the constitutional documents that we're putting together for the university. And one of Neil's insights, what he brought into our conversation, which is structuring the way we're thinking about governance, is that universities have an executive branch and a legislative branch, but no judicial branch. And what we mean is that a legislative branch are those who compose the founding documents, principles, the board. They're responsible for upholding, the legislative components of an institution. The executive branch are the administrators, the faculty who execute on the mission. But what happens when you have conflict between those? What happens if the board starts to drift away from the mission, or the faculty? You end up with just a power struggle, and there's no third party to help you adjudicate. So we are literally beginning with our own judicial branch, our own Supreme Court, that will be composed of legal experts whose primary concern is that of academic freedom and free speech, who exist outside the university, but who agree to serve on this on a kind of a panel, let's call it a Supreme Court, and who will select their own members in perpetuity so that they're independent from the institution. So if there are any missional conflicts that come up, if a professor says my academic freedom is being violated by the institution can't police itself. This appeal will go to this body, and the university, by our constitution, will be bound by the decisions that they make. So we have, let's say, a watchdog group whose only job is to refer to our foundational principles and documents and hold us accountable. And similarly, briefly, we're instituting perpetual self-assessment processes. So Ian and I were just talking about, he's going to join us in a few weeks. Every spring, the University of Austin holds its first principals summit. And we bring our faculty and our staff together with people outside the institution, people from the academy, public intellectuals, people in education, and we spend a weekend together assessing whether or not the University of Austin is currently living up to its promise. And if we're not, then we have to course correct. So these are the ways I think that you stick to mission over time.
Yeah, and I love that, and I can't wait to come to the summit focused on first principles. I think the other way you avoid drift is that you really have to define what the impact is that you want for your school, for your system, for your institution. So for example, we spend a lot of time, do we want to impact by model or impact by replication? So one of my colleagues in New York, Eva Moskowitz, runs Success Academy Networks, which is a phenomenal charter school network. She has nearly 50 schools now throughout New York City, and I think plans, to take over the world, have 150 within the next decade or so. And that takes one kind of operational expertise and efficiency that's incredible. We more likely will expand and have our impact through model. You know, if we build this first Vertex Partnership Academies, and maybe we'll have 2 or 3 others, but each shows that how we set up this governance structure, which now makes it possible, not only in New York City, but anywhere in the country, to build great high schools, then do we expand by codifying what that structure is, what other states could follow. You know, we're going to be developing a curriculum that it will be freely distributed anywhere in the country. If you want to teach things like the success sequence, which some of you may know is something I spend a lot of time on, and educating the next generation on how to think about the timing of family formation. So part of it is just thinking about what's the impact. Because you don't have to have 100 schools or 100 UATXs, but if UATX is really strong and it codifies why it's so effective, then you can give a roadmap to others to build their own institutions.
So as you're building these new institutions, you're also building institutional cultures. And I wonder if, you know, it's not just we need regulatory change and so forth, but you're asking something different of students and their parents, and that takes some adjustment and getting used to.
Well, certainly in a school setting, what I think about culture, it's so often people don't acknowledge that by virtue of running a school, you're inherently building culture, right? If you say you're not building culture, then you're actually building culture, right? It's just a question of, are you deliberate or not? So our school is organized around the 4 cardinal virtues: courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And we're really trying to orchestrate the entire school, the curriculum, our rituals, even the readings that we do reinforce what does courage mean to you in this context. And so, you know, we also have another, our mantra, equality of opportunity, individual dignity, common humanity. You know, when I ran for school board in my hometown, that was the mantra I said probably 500 or so times to identify this is what we stand for. We're not, like, you won't come to our school and see a DEI director or someone who's just looking at our kids through the prism of race or class or gender, or just, you know, flattening them to just a stereotype of some group identity. That is very different than the general psyche, and you've got to be prepared for people who aren't down with that program. So, for example, anyone who applies to our school has to watch. I've done 2 debates on C-SPAN related to critical race theory, where I debated a professor from Bryn Mawr College who didn't even know who Thomas Sowell is, you know, an expert on critical race theory. But anyone who applies to Vertex has to watch that debate and then engage in a conversation. Would you be able to create this kind of viewpoint diversity and accept this in your own classroom? So we're trying to signal to anyone who wants to come into the organization what we stand for.
And I agree entirely. I mean, you create culture by modeling virtues, and I can't wait for your kids to apply to our university.
If they're on the diploma pathway, but they might be on the careers pathway,
Fair enough.
and equal stature if they do so.
Fair enough. So, you know, you have to think about the purpose of the institution that you're building, and you know, what is a university? A university is a place that creates knowledge, transmits knowledge, and preserves knowledge. It's a fundamental purpose of a university. So as we build our university, we have to think about, you know, what virtues, what characteristics do we need to cultivate in the service of knowledge creation, transmission, and preservation. It is clear as day that the creation of knowledge is dependent upon the free exchange of ideas. That seems to me to be irrefutable. So how do you create an environment that preserves and protects the free exchange of ideas? You have to define what, let's say, civil discourse is. And when you define that and you expressly share that definition with the community that you expect to uphold your principles, you begin to create that community, and then you put it in action. For us, civil discourse is composed of 3 elements. The first is intellectual humility. We're all human beings. We all know some things about the world, but not everything. We all have a heck of a lot to learn. So we have to approach the learning process with intellectual humility. The second component is the equal dignity of all interlocutors in a conversation. We are assuming that we are all rational beings, that we all operate according to the same fundamental human principles, and therefore we have equal standing at the table of conversation. And the third element is a passion for truth. You have to have a passion. If you're going to be part of a university community that is focused on seeking knowledge, you have to be a truth-seeking person. You have to have a passion for that. So when you articulate your principles, then you build the culture around those principles. So for example, you go to many universities and you have orientation for the first few days, to kind of acculturate you to the university. The first thing we're going to do at our orientation is hold Socratic seminars. So the very first thing students start to do when they come to us is exchange ideas. So they can learn that this is the kind of place that values that above everything else.
I wonder if there isn't a kind of built-in fragility, or maybe delicacy is a better word for this kind of cultural achievement, in that you do have to have that humility, but you also have to have confidence. You have to have confidence in the capacity of reason to bring us closer to the truth. You have to have confidence in the existence of a truth to be discerned, while at the same time not being completely convinced that you've already got it.
Well, I think intellectual humility assumes those things, right? Mm-hmm. Why do we have intellectual humility? Because we know there are things that are true in the world, yet we haven't quite identified all of them ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's where the passion for truth and intellectual humility are sort of counterweights to each other. It's that passion that drives you to continue asking questions, even though finding the answers is somehow challenging or difficult. Look, the mind is a muscle, all right? Muscles are strengthened through tension, through opposition, through exercise. That's what conversation is about. That's what learning is about. So throwing ourselves into kind of the scrum of learning, I think, builds confidence over time. But you do have to keep that North Star of truth as your as the thing that orients you and gives you direction.
And hello, can you hear me? Yeah. I would just add, unfortunately these days we now need an adjective in front of the word truth. We need objective truth. Not my truth, not your truth, not relative truth, like actual truth. Like when you see an application form that says sex, you don't see male, female, and 10 other options. Right? And this is particularly dangerous in our society, where one can recognize that, for example, in this, as relates to, for example, gender identity, there might be people who are experiencing questioning their identity while not questioning the biological scientific truth of male, female as the two binary options that exist all of human history. And yet it takes great courage to stand for objective truth. And that's where I see leaders in higher education, in K-12, falling down on the job. They're not standing up for objective truth in front of young people who are desperate, who are yearning for someone just to be straight with them. And we just saw it at Stanford a few weeks ago. We saw it at Columbia I guess last week. Of our institutions, our leaders in our institutions crumbling. And that, to me, I'm hoping UATX, I'm hoping Vertex, other leaders in institutions stand for objective truth.
So we've talked a little bit about the explosion of school choice, and I wonder if you agree that a lot of this has to do with COVID and parents getting a new look at what's going on at their schools and what's not going on at their schools. And whether, secondly, there are any similarly propitious circumstances that are helping people rethink colleges and universities?
I think one of the things that we learned at the university level during COVID is that person-to-person, human-to-human education is essential, especially for undergraduates. Because the purpose of an undergraduate education is not the transfer of information, which you can do online, it's transformation, which you can only do amongst human beings. So the one thing we learned is how vitally important it is that we gather together in places called universities or colleges and do the hard work of knowledge seeking together. The other thing that we learned during COVID is there are a lot of things that happen at a university, administrative things that don't need to happen. And a lot of those administrators can do their work far away from a university.
The further the better.
And the further the better.
Yeah.
So I think what COVID helped us do is concentrate on the essential and core mission of education, which is a human activity, the human activity of truth seeking.
Ditto.
All right. Well, I think that we are holding that rarest of things, a conference that stays on schedule. And I hope you'll agree with me that it is the objective truth that our panelists are pretty great. Thank you.